Welcome to DevOps Decrypted, where we talk all things DevOps. I'm your host, Laura Larimore, here with our Adaptavist panel. Today we have Rasmus and Matt, and we also have a special guest named Chalky. And quickly of note, we'd like to ask you to leave some feedback at devopsdecrypted at adaptavist.com. Matt, would you like to kick us off and introduce Chalky to our audience?
Well, I absolutely can. Yes, thank you, Laura. So, yes, I don't think his real name is actually Chalky, but we're going to go with that for now.
Yeah, it is. That's it by default.
It is
just
by
yeah,
default.
first and last name. Yeah.
Yeah, first and last name. So, welcome, Chalky, to DevOps Decrypted. So, Chalky has worked in Adaptavist for about 5 or 6 years now, I think, running lots and lots of our cloud infrastructure. The amount of stuff that this guy runs with his team in our cloud infrastructure is it's large, and I think it's safe to say that a lot of it wouldn't actually work if it wasn't for him. So yes, Chalky. So there's a glowing introduction from me. Did you want to say a few words about yourself?
No, I'll leave it at that. That's as good as it's going to get. That's all downhill from here.
All downhill from here, as it always is. So we're going to. I think we decided when we were putting together the agenda for this podcast that we've ended up with lots of stuff that's about money. So I think we're going to talk about money a lot today.
But it's all about money, yeah. How to perhaps prioritize it better, how to actually figure out what you're doing with it, since a lot of the time it's just kind of like you have money, you have needs, are they connected?
This seems simple, doesn't it? It seems like a really, really simple thing. It's like if you look at it in the context of a business, perhaps a business providing cloud services, and you have a need to run servers and infrastructure, so you spend money on it. And then I guess you work out if you can sell products and services that you sell them for more money than what you're paying for your infrastructure and all your people and all your other costs. And that's how you do business, right? And everybody's doing cloud, not having to run their own data centers, not being deafened by living in data centers. And therefore, that's all nice and good. And we have nice small cloud bills and everybody loves it, right?
Well, yeah, you say that, but what people forget is all the procurement decisions now become the software teams, because they're now buying all these IaaS services. So instead of having this like big old stack co-load in a data center somewhere, and that's, you've got a finite amount of hardware till you procure more, you could, in theory, infinitely procure a number of services and infinitely scale them.
But this is the dream, isn't it? It's like, yes, you just buy what you need. You don't have to buy a data center and generators and three-phase electrical power and high voltage and air conditioning and all that stuff. And yet, I've been reading the news this week, and lots of people seem to be getting this wrong. Or if not so much getting it wrong, as there's lots of stuff going on. We've looked at, for example, CNCF did a survey, which I'm just reading here, which is that people who are running Kubernetes are overprovisioning things, and so they're spending like loads and loads more money than they thought they should be. This isn't the dream. This is not the dream we were promised with this infinitely scalable IaaS, is it?
Well, we probably that's not just the Kubernetes problem, is it? Like any compute we provision, we probably overscale it. We put a finger in the air, see which way the wind's blowing. Go, yeah, that'll do. And then when you start running it in the wild, you get some idea about actually how things are going to behave, and then you can scale inwards or purchase savings plans and stuff. Like you always start by guessing, don't you, or over provisioning, and then you just get more efficient. But to get more efficient, you need observability tools and. And that means financially, your financials now become observable. They become metrics. You want to be looking at not just, your standard metrics or logs you'd use in an application, but actually what you're spending, and that's easily forgotten, I think.
Yep, and I think that there's also another point that I keep harping on these calls, in that tools, people, process. You can count like paying for your infrastructure and such in the tool bucket here, which is so easy to click a button, here are your tools. So here's your hosting, here's your Kubernetes and so on. But the culture and process change in getting people to use Kubernetes right is a whole nother ballgame. And I have examples of having seen that play out. And it's just like, yeah, we could totally do this better. Why aren't we? Well, as it turns out, it's hard to get people to do things in a more efficient way if they have other things keeping them busy.
I'd argue that people shouldn't actually have to do things efficiently, should they, really? If you're looking at it from a developer's perspective, or maybe like a product owner's perspective, it's like, well, surely I should have this platform that kind of spins up what I need. And it's kind of right-sized. We've got how many years worth of experience of doing this sort of thing. And it seems to me that a lot of the overspend comes through. I mean, I'm not trying to beat up on people here for over-provisioning things, but is it that some of these needs have got so complicated and so abstracted that it's hard to see like how much capacity we need, and how much things need to be demarcated, I guess. I mean, Rasmus, I don't know if you can talk to this a little bit, because I know that with the venue stuff, you have these decisions as to like how much of a box do you put each of your individual customer in, and thus how much do you have to over provision to make sure that none of those customers bump into each other, and have the room to grow, right?
And that's exactly it. Like Kubernetes is good at scaling, but if your business logic gets in the way of that by having you want to kind of like isolate different customers from each other, you might end up in a situation, and I've seen this as a consultant with tons of different companies too, that each team gets their own cluster, which is kind of like, that's functionally easy, but it is not cost efficient. It's even to the point where, of course, since I'm a nerd, I have my own Kubernetes cluster for like hobby projects and such, but I'm having a hard time optimizing it because I'm using one node. And every once in a while, I use two nodes. And I was like, ooh, that sounds efficient. But then I realized, oh, the second node is just not spinning down because there's some quirk in that pod that's stuck there. So I'm manually scaling my cluster down to one node, which is just goofy. That's not how you're supposed to use Kubernetes. So with something like Venue, for instance, we try to do the whole manage things and spin up Kubernetes clusters for you. And I remember one of my early pitches was that, okay, how about we don't just like host this giant cluster to optimize cost, and each client just gets their own like namespaces or set of namespaces, and then you're going to say, well, but then are we going to be on the hook? Like, what if this thing over here doesn't work, or one customer ends up impacting a different customer, and you get into all these naughty issues and the whole like, well, yeah, this is cost efficient, but is it going to be problematic at that people and process level?
Yeah. What did you compromise for that efficiency, right?
Yeah. And right now we're still growing, so I don't think we really have the good background set of infrastructure yet to really optimize it back down. It's still, not too much to worry about. But one day it will be, and hopefully that day we will be able to either do like mega clusters with lots of customers, or otherwise just be able to efficiently use Kubernetes. Not just, well, it's there, we made it convenient, good luck.
I think it plays into like the fact that Kubernetes is designed obviously to scale and to run workloads of a certain type, doesn't it? It's I think the things that work well in Kubernetes are the things that are stateless, the things that start up quickly and shut down quickly, and don't linger. But I think a lot of organizations aren't necessarily in a position to run workloads that are ideal for Kubernetes, are they? And you get this weird thing where people have Rasmus, I think, and Chalky as well, you talked about business priorities earlier on. And I always come up and stop a little bit when I hear like, oh, well, we need to make sure that Kubernetes fits into our business priorities, or our tech stack fits into our business priorities and the way we want to do things. And I wonder if in a lot of cases it still doesn't quite hit there. Things like the scaling. So I'm remembering. So Adaptavist is a big Atlassian partner. We've got some clusters that run development and test instances of Jira and Confluence and Bitbucket, all of the self-hosted Atlassian products. And we've got that running on Kubernetes, and it's the dream. We scale up the cluster when we need more, and then we scale down. Then hang on a minute. We've got these big monoliths that are running inside the cluster. And if you want to rebalance your cluster by removing nodes, you have to bump some of these instances to other nodes, but they take like 5 minutes to start up. And so, yeah, we've kind of over-provisioned that and can't really shut down nodes as fast as we would want to, right?
But also on that, you're bundling services, right? Because you're trying to run like Postgres as well. And you don't want to, because they're dev and test instances, you don't want to be provisioning RDS clusters for every single instance of those products being run. So, you're running a sidecar, which means you're going to want to, you want, a persistent volume for it. Well, actually, you will for Jira anyway, right? For artifacts to get uploaded and such.
That's right, yeah.
And then there's all the other like persistent shenanigans you have to go through as well. When dealing with that, and again that it goes back to cost again as well, like how much do you want to run, how much do you want to over provision, how easily do you want to be able to move things from one place to another, and generally that comes with a cost because you're locking yourself into an architecture that might not necessarily adjust for different use cases. And actually in Kubernetes is a good example of that, because generally you're building a cluster to provide a platform that has some opinions about what you want to run on it as well. Like you don't tend to, like talking about mega clusters, for example, you're going to have an absurd amount of like controllers and operators and such to do everything that the business wants to do. But then you'll find that it's going to be really hard to move away from it now, because everyone needs every single feature that cluster's provided, rather than giving someone a cluster that meets the needs of what they're trying to deliver. I think there's a balancing act there, because you don't want to be on either end of that spectrum. Like what you want is probably somewhere more in the middle.
I almost wonder if one could throw in envy as a factor in here. It's normally hype, but when you think about where Kubernetes came from, it coming out of Borg that ran Google, which is like Google scale stuff. And then Google releases it as open source, like, here you go, you can be Google too now. And these companies are like, ooh, we can be Google. Yes, let us go for that. And then they go into the whole like, yeah, we're going to scale to Google scale and do all these awesome things because now we're using the Google tool, without realizing that, oh, wait a minute, we're not shaped like Google. And that's where another topic we've talked about repeatedly, digital transformation, really comes in for the whole like, if you have a bunch of monoliths, this might not work so well for you yet until you can refactor and improve it. And if you have a lot of stuff that's tied to like specific hardware and fun things, I've had issues in the past where teams had trouble getting on Kubernetes because they used legacy software that was licensed to a specific CPU core on like old, bare metal stuff, and they didn't know how they could translate it into Kubernetes. And kind of
like that still exists, by the way.
Oh yeah,
it's not like gone for people
Absolutely.
to do that.
And on a similar note there, Chalky, you mentioned RDS instead of Postgres, which is like, I love kind of pure Kubernetes. And this is where my purest open source nerd comes out, because it's easy out of the box, but you can so complicate it. And that's where you get into the whole like, well, yeah, we need all these controllers. We need all this Terraform to also spin up like load balancers and RDS and all these things. And then you're locked in. Like now you're stuck on AWS. Even though if it was like pure Kubernetes, you could in theory just like, yep, well, let's move some volumes and spin it up over here. But
that's not completely true, because the lock-in is dependent on the abstraction you provide, right? So say, for example, you have a CRD that is just, I want a Postgres cluster, right, with some arguments. You could abstract it in such a way that the developer doesn't know whether it's RDS or another IaaS's flavor of Postgres or MySQL. Like it's not... But that's an abstraction. If you're going to give them Crossplane or Terraform's operator and then go, right, you can deploy whatever you want, then you've locked them in, right? But you can abstract that away. And
rewind a bit there, Chalky. Sorry.
That's a maturity thing.
So we're talking about CRDs, Crossplane, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So we came back in on this in terms of Rasmus and his pure Kubernetes. So just as a bit of expansion. Actually, no, you can do this since you invoked it, Chalky. Do you want to explain what like Crossplane is?
Yeah, Crossplane's like an infrastructure as code controller for Kubernetes. So it gives you you could just write infrastructure as if you was writing Kubernetes manifests effectively, and it's I would argue it's so big it's a monolith. It's quite big, but it is Kubernetes native.
But when you're talking Crossplane, we're talking about provisioning things like
IaaS stuff.
databases.
Yeah.
Yeah, and other random AWS/GCP/Azure infrastructure from within your Kubernetes cluster, right?
Yeah. And that feeds into the cost stuff as well, right? Because if you're providing CRDs to produce that stuff, that's now another cost. It's not just the compute cost of the cluster, but like if you're using RDS, like have you got good opinions about how to scale those clusters? Are you running serverless Postgres? Are you scaling it manually? Have you got your own alarms in there? Like what's the opinion? So those sorts of things still should be considered, and that's where like platform teams like mine exist, right? The idea is that the development team shouldn't have to understand how to do that. They're not DBAs. They might know how to migrate, make a migration, write good queries, set up indexes properly and stuff, but they don't want to manage the cluster or the database, right? So you want it as abstracted away as possible, and chances are you do want to use something managed like RDS because to move that, like to offload that concern. So when you buy into it, again, like you're making a procurement decision like in advance for the developer, and so actually having a good handle on it is quite important, and the tooling, and you don't want to, I think providing the right abstraction as well, so you're not baked into the cloud platform or actually fully like married to it, is actually quite an important one to do. However, at the same time, if you're getting value from it, is it, again, does it really hurt you at the end of the day if you've locked yourself in? It's a good problem to have, is kind of what I'm saying, I suppose.
And anybody watching this as a video might have caught me on the whole, like, aha, yes, I was waiting for the Crossplane reference. Yeah. And I love that. I love the tool. I love the idea of it because, again, it kind of like, it almost like it builds Kubernetes on top of Kubernetes, but it's all like pure and pretty and it works beautifully and it's great. But another topic we've hit on this podcast in the past was the complexity of Kubernetes. And can you actually simplify it, or are you just moving it around? So at first when I saw Crossplane, like, yes, this looks awesome. We should do this. And then we did it. And guess what? We only ever use one cloud and have no plans to go to a different cloud. And it's kind of like, well, but we put all this effort into this cool, awesome thing that lets us spread to multi-cloud. Do we actually have a use case of going multi-cloud at some point? And that pulled me right back to the ground, like, this is actually more of like a people and process and architecture issue than a tools thing. So
I've got all this way in and not mentioned Melvin Conway yet. It totally is. Because yes, so you put Crossplane in and it massively simplifies a whole load of stuff. But the flip side of that is that there's a whole load of complexity hidden away. And I would say that the arguments for using a tool like that are twofold. Number one is, yes, in theory, makes you more easily multi-cloud. TLDR, I don't believe in designing for multi-cloud at the start, and I don't think any of us do. But the other point is that it lets you use these native resources that probably your developers are quite keen on. I mean, we come from a world where developers used to have to ask server admins very nicely to install something, and then all of a sudden they can spin up their own databases. They don't even have to worry about installing packages or anything like that, let alone operating systems. And so, we get to this wonderful situation where, in theory, developers can take control and spin up things that are kind of not mandated, are acceptable to an infrastructure team, a platform engineering team, and off we go. And yet we still all bring it back to FinOps and the cost of things. I think it's a bit of a misnomer to obsess too much around costs, but we have to acknowledge. And actually, one of the reasons why we invited Chalky on was to talk a little bit about cost management and FinOps that we're doing here at Adaptavist. I think personally, it's something that we shouldn't have to worry about too much, but we evidently do. Because it's big and there are products out there that help people with FinOps. FinOps itself is a thing. You can go to FinOps meetups, there's FinOps conferences, etc. I'm interested to know, Chalky, what sort of stuff you're doing here at Adaptavist to kind of help us along that way.
Well, I will start with on that, and that is when you say like DevOps and stuff, I was thinking back to like the whole DevSecOps thing, when it sounded like security is everybody's problem, right? And I think you could say the same like with FinOps and the financial stuff. Like I said about like engineers are making procurement decisions now. If they want to use RDS, they've committed to paying for that service now. Going back to that example. And what I've been doing here at Adaptavist is like we've got quite a large estate on AWS. We spend quite a lot of money on there, to put it mildly. And actually, we've grown fast, and we've taken the time to look at what we spend. And when you look at there's a term used with FinOps, and it's probably used in many other things. And actually, we was talking about it off the podcast a minute ago, which is like crawl, walk, run. And in many regards, like we're very much still in a crawl state. Like a FinOps starts with observability. Like you want to understand what you're actually spending. You don't necessarily want to react to it necessarily straight away. And that's actually like getting people to understand what their cost of ownership is, right? And this goes back to the simple things that we do, like tag our resources or add labels to our containers and pods and that sort of stuff, and have actually some sort of common matrix of like tags, labels and such that we can reuse and then just try and make sense of things, really. And that's what we've been doing on the start of our journey, because actually we've, as with all businesses, they grow quickly, these things come late, and therefore we have a bunch of legacy we have to fix. And this is fine, right? Again, these are great problems to have. We've grown, and now we've got to, grow up. And so, we're working on the quality of the data really at the moment, and getting other engineering managers like myself, getting the tools in people's hands to make the right decisions. And what we're trying not to do is boil the ocean. We want other teams to start their phase of crawl, walk, and run, and to start. So what we want to do is just is to get the high level aggregations in there. So, say for example, a business unit in a business like ours, there's a bunch of business units, but we have centralized billing. And so the first thing we want to do is to get the general managers of them business units to care about their costs. And so we want to make the highest level label, and then let them aggregate deeper based on their business needs, because some business units will have different ways of measuring their cost of ownership than others. And so we don't want to impose any opinions on them. We just need to go, here's your share of the bill, and would you like our help in helping you understand how you want to drill that down further? And so again, like we're very much crawl ourselves. It's mainly a data quality thing, but there actually are things where I believe we're at maybe even walk or run. So I think that over the past few years, we've been really good at looking at what our spend is on certain services. So rather than looking at a business unit level internally, we're just looking at the service levels, usage on, I say, AWS, and just buying savings plans. Just we know we're spending that much. Why not just get a savings plan? Let's make some savings. We haven't had to do any architecture changes. We haven't had to fix anything forward. We know we're committing to that spend. So just commit to it, right?
So the savings plans are basically when you just say, well, we spent this much on this last year, therefore we expect to spend about the same next year. So
or more.
Lock in that spending. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, you could look at the service and see how it's trended over the year and go, actually, based on that, we can make a pretty fair guess that we're going to use this much. And then you can save quite a lot of money on making that commitment. And if you're willing to put money down as well, you can save even more, because like I said, if you know you're spending that and there's money in the bank, you could actually go, do you know what, we'll just commit to it and pay us, prepay as well, and there's further savings to be made. And they scale quite well, and that's before you even start looking at improving the data. For example, you've already benefited from the tools, and you don't have to use any third-party products for this. Just go on the cost explorer, do it based on service, and buy a savings plan that meets that.
I can also speak to having been on kind of the receiving end of Chalky's useful work here, because on the venue team, we got this cost explorer thingy now sending reports into a Slack channel. And that is cool, both because it proves there's data there. And I can't imagine, or I can't explain how much I sometimes worry about how 2, 3, 4 AWS accounts ago, there's like a goofy resource somewhere that I didn't know how to delete that's still billing hundreds of dollars after years just sitting there. But then we went to this thing where suddenly there's a message in the channel saying that, oh, Rasmus's individual account went up by $400 this month. Like, wait, what? huh? But I'm not doing anything.
Probably because you've got a VPC with
Static
NAT
IPs.
gateways, and the IPs cost money, right?
Yeah, so it's like, oh, okay, that's a good reminder to go clean that stuff up like right now, which if only that was easier to do on AWS, but that's a whole different podcast.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a good way of doing things, isn't it? It's because when you go into this, here's FinOps, here's our Cost Explorer, here's our CloudZero, whatever tool we're using, and here's a big list of like who's spending the most, and that's like if you're the person at the top of that list, then you're inevitably going to feel the pressure. It's like, well, we've got to cut down on our spending. Maybe it's not the right thing to do, but it seems like what we've got with this tool is something that says, well, actually, this happened this month, which didn't happen the month before. Is that right? Has something changed? Have AWS started charging for something that they weren't charging for before? And we need to adjust our behavior. And I think that probably puts the power a lot more into the hands of the people who are running these services rather than it just being relentless, like, don't spend so much type pressure, right?
Yeah, let's not make it a stick, right? So, like, I think putting it in people's hands might actually I would see that pressure if I was going to be given this new tool. Go, oh, by the way, this has all been allocated to me. Great. But what you want to do is go, well, actually, now I know that. Can I actually prove the value it's delivering to the rest of the business or to customers, even for that matter? And can I segment it further to understand what are the products or services that are there that are delivering it? Because like I said, we're only doing it based on BU right now, for example. But if we go down to products, and if we do it based on products and things like that, then you'll probably find that, there are some things that are costing more than the value they derive, but it'll actually give you a better idea of actually how much value you create, because I think it's very hard to, like, I find it very hard to do that when people go say, well, what do you offer to the business in these aspects? And then if you go and actually look at Cost Explorer and be able to chop it down, you'll realise quite quickly, actually, you deliver a lot of value. You've just not quantified it very well. And so actually the tool kind of helps you figure that out. Of course, it could work the other way and you go, damn, I'm burning a lot of cash here. I mean, that's probably still true.
That could be useful though. Like there's some people who are like, I want to be better all the time. So if they see, oh, I'm burning a lot of cash, they may feel like, oh, I would like to do that a little better, So I think that it could be useful, like as a social construct, to create a new way of thinking about what you're spending and where.
I love that it's an automated notification that shows up on Slack. That is a perfect example of how you can have a tool support a people thing or a people and process thing. Because, and I know this from past years of having worked in an open source project online where you're interacting with volunteer contributors and so on, and where if you as a maintainer are kind of like nagging a ticket because somebody's not putting in all the information or they haven't given you updates and so on, you come off as a nag, and it's like that's negative. It demotivates people. If it's a robot that just sits there, hey, this ticket hasn't been updated for X weeks. Are you up for updating it soon? If not, at some point later, I might close it because I'm a robot. I'm not a human. I'm not doing it because I'm mad at you. I'm a robot. So when you do that, but with costs, that's really, I get a similar feel for that. Like if like somebody had called me out like a person, hey, Rasmus, you're spending too much money, I might be like, oh, wait a minute. What is this? Is this person got it out from me or something like that? Where if it's a robot, like, oh, okay, well, the robot said it must be true.
And with that personal nature of something, you could have a tendency to be like, let me cut this down to as small as I possibly can. And then you wind up not being as innovative because you're not looking at how much value am I getting out of this. You're just trying to get that number smaller so you'll get the monkey off your back. So, yeah, I think the automated robot thing is a very cool feature.
The automated robot provides another feature, by the way, and that's like, say if you're an engineering team, you're changing your architecture, you change some code, and you might not have envisioned it having a cost impact. Having those sorts of bots or anomaly detections going on means that it's in your hands as soon as the anomaly's been detected, and then you can fix forward, because you may not deliberately be trying to spend more money, but there was an inadvertent consequence of a change you've made, but now you can fix it forward. You've learned that it's caused an effect. You can do the triage, and again, it goes back to it's an observability tool as well. Like just like if you had metrics for scaling or alerts for errors, you'd do the same thing for, well, your costs have changed outside of expected boundaries, so worth a look.
This might also be a good pitch for more chat ops again. because and I've also loved this, although I see it implemented so rarely. Because if that robot can tell you, hey, by the way, you're spending this much money and you have like 3 test environments that are still running, and you go, oh, why are they still running? Like, hey, robot, turn off these environments. Enter. Done. You're done.
Delete those CRDs and then production goes down.
I mean,
I'm
sure. Whoops.
Yeah, I think this plays into something we probably don't really have time to go into in much detail, but we're kind of seeing like monitoring and observability products getting actually sensibly using AI for anomaly detection, and it's exactly the same principle. It's like, your CPU is constant at about 5 or 10%, and then suddenly it goes to 100, anomaly. Your spending is constantly like $1,000 in this account, and it suddenly goes to 5,000, anomaly. And yeah, I think so. I'm always wary of robots sending messages to me. I think I find them a lot more ignorable. But there seems to be increasing more amounts of science based on observability metrics, based on real dollar spends as well, just making it a lot more valid. So yeah, maybe I'll stop ignoring those machines and fall in love with them like you have.
But that's where they add real value, but the value is really subtle. I think some people expect this massive paradigm shift in how you work, but I don't think I don't expect that. I expect things to be subtle. I expect little things to be to enable me to be a bit faster, but I don't expect it to remove me. Obviously, the whole doom and gloom discussions that we get is around us being replaced, and and to some extent that may be true, or in the future it'll be more true. But right now, they enable us to be faster and make better decisions, and that's how we should be making the most of them. And anomaly detection has been around for ages, right? That's not a unique thing that's come out of more recent LLMs. We can do much more interesting things with them now.
Yeah, precisely. It's an evolution, isn't it?
So we've spoken about what we've been doing, but I've failed to mention the product we're using and actually how we are using it to benefit us if it's of an interest.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so we've been like using CloudZero. We piloted it last year, and we're not we've not gone completely mad with it just yet. We're trying to, again, we want to do the crawl walk run thing rather than steaming ahead. We want to understand what value we want to get from it. And the first thing we're working on right now is cost of ownership, and it's got quite a useful. I don't know. Can you call it costs as code, I suppose, or finance as code? They've got a thing called cost formation, and it looks very inspired by CloudFormation. Very, very inspired. In fact, our cost formation configuration file is 1,000 lines. It's really hard to read. That's probably one of my few complaints of CloudZero, by the way. The rest of my feedback is quite good. And that's something they've taken on board and they've acknowledged. And we've just written our own tooling to work around it, because a monolithic YAML file is hard to work with. But what it allows us to do is create custom dimensions, which are things we can use to aggregate our costs. And that's really the powerful tool that there is. So, for example, business unit, we can derive business unit from a number of sources such as Docker labels, AWS tags, AWS account names or IDs. And then what we can do is bundle those into that dimension. And that gives us a nice way of grouping things together, because unfortunately, like I said, this is the real world. Businesses grow quickly. Nothing is necessarily perfect. There's always going to be tech debt. And because we've got this config as code method of managing costs, we can deal with the edge cases and make sure they get rolled up into those things. And one of the earliest things we did actually was around individual accounts. So Rasmus referred to his and seeing the insights of his costs. What we were doing there is we were actually using our HR data, pulling out people that work inside business units and rolling them into the business unit. So Rasmus's account falls into the venue business unit, for example. So when the business venue costs go up, it might be Rasmus's account ID that appears as the anomaly in this example. But what that does allow, though, is for general managers and engineering managers to see that what the usage is on the individual accounts as well, because what we was for a long time was very blind to what people were doing onto those accounts. And effectively, you're giving someone their own account to spend Adaptavist money effectively, and you can spend a lot by accident, right? You can run a step function or deploy an RDS cluster or have an EC2 instance with a GPU attached for unknown use cases, and you can spend a lot of money very quickly, and these things can highlight it really, really well.
I think it's quite interesting how we're now trying to put more substance around the thing where we're like, there you go, Rasmus, there you go, Matt, there's your individual account to do stuff in. Because depending on like which side of the business you're on, that could be either the best thing in the world or the most horrific thing in the world. It's
yes, double-edged sword.
Yeah, one hat on, I'm like, oh my God, it could just spend like greater than the gross domestic product than some African country very, very easily. And on the other side, it's like, well, actually, and this is the side I more passionately believe in, that's how the magic happens. It's like giving clever people access to tools to try and work out what they can create with them. And I'm really interested to see how this plays out, where we're like, well, actually, yeah, Rasmus, we know you just created this extra cluster here. And the temptation to go, well, did you need to do that? Did you need to spend that extra $1,000? Is really high. And I think we've absolutely got to battle against letting the high definition of these numbers define us.
Yep. And in all things, it's a balancing act. And that's why I love to get more information. I love to get more easy way of acting to it, like turning off the things through chat ops. But yeah, we're still human beings. We still make mistakes. And just for the record, I have never left an unsecured Jenkins for testing online, forgotten about it, and have a crypto mining robot find it and start mining Bitcoin.
Yeah,
I have never done that.
It should not be used as a stick. It should be used as a carrot to help people understand the costs they're making. I don't think we'd ever have that intention. The idea is to get better ideas, because say for example, you're a business unit and you're reporting on your margins, for example, but actually your report on your margins are wrong because someone in your BU was actually using their individual account to produce something, and actually your profit and loss is not as accurate as you might think it was. And so actually that still needs to be visible, but it's still not there to hold someone over the coals over, but it's still an actually important thing, like when we're budgeting on and reporting on our costs and our usage. And the other thing is that is just talking about cost of ownership. Like we've not even moved into the subject of like unit economics, which we're not we're still very much cruel on that side of things. But we run a bunch of services where there's APIs with a bunch of like tenants, and a tenant could be another team or a business unit. There's quite a few. And what we currently have at the moment is just our cost of ownership of the service we run and the APIs we have. And if we wanted to allocate a portion of that cost to another team or business unit based on their usage of that service, we can't do that yet. But the CloudZero, which we're using, does enable that for us. So we can do, for example, what's called telemetry-based cost weighting. So the idea is that we've got a dimension with this much cost and we've got these number of tenants, and based on their usage of our application, we can emit metrics that affect the weight of how that cost is distributed between our tenants. And in that way, you can actually figure out what your cost, like your unit cost is.
So this kind of gets you closer to understanding that big amorphous blob of like shared costs. You're providing a service for multiple people and you can't really tell who's using exactly which bit of it, right?
Yeah, and actually also knowing what value you're giving people, because if they're using it, if you're costing this much, but it's actively being used by a bunch of other business units, you can see their usage of it, then you obviously are providing some degree of value, let alone understanding the unit economics of it.
Fascinating. So as promised, we did indeed talk about money. Well, that's it today for DevOps Decrypted. Connect with us on social at Adaptavist and let us know what you think of the show. For myself and Matt and Rasmus and Chalky, we're signing off.